So, Una, tell me, how did you get into comics in brief?
In brief, started reading them. I read comics as a kid, the sort of usual kids' comics, and then after Viz had a bit of a break, um, and then got back into reading them when I was studying for a master's degree in fine art, and I was a little bit bored by the fine art agenda. It was my light relief, and I discovered all the kind of serious comics that came out.
Like what? Anything in
Well,
particular?
the first one I read was Watchmen, then I read Mouse, then I read Persepolis, then I read Fun Home. Then I got into Chris Ware for a bit, and so on and so on. So, that it seemed so much more meaningful to be making those kind of stories than the ones that I was making. That's what I started to do. I did manage to complete my master's degree in fine art, my MFA, but I was already starting to work in a completely different way, and so that's where it started.
So, why did you think telling your story like in Becoming Unbecoming as a graphic novel, what did that offer you as opposed to just writing the story?
Well, I am obviously interested in writing, and I think of myself as a writer as well, but I felt that there were already too many misery novels, and that most of them were not done very well. I felt that they were often prurient and made abuse into a spectacle. I knew that there are so many narratives about violent men in film and on TV and in literature. There are actually 19 different stories about Peter Sutcliffe, and I wanted to, as a survivor of male violence myself, I wanted to make a narrative that was about the women, and which sidelined perpetrators in favour of personal narrative about people on the receiving end of violence rather than those who perpetuate it. So that was my kind of my concept, I suppose. But while I was making the book, because I'd not made comics before, I was trying to work out how I could innovate narrative flow, essentially. I was really interested in the comics that I'd read, mostly because they seemed to be trying to push some boundary somewhere. And I was interested in comics conventions mostly because I wanted to try to play with them a little bit. And I suppose that's where the fine art background comes in. So while I was making Becoming Unbecoming, it wasn't just about working out stories about violence and trying to make a kind of contextualised memoir. It's a bit like a historical book in some sense. I was also thinking about how to draw stories, how to lay out pages, how to break through panels and gutters and find different ways of organising elements on a page. And it did take quite a long time to write because it was very deeply researched. It involved sitting in the library and looking at microfilm for about a whole year, every Thursday, reading all the newspapers from 1975 to 1981. It involved researching statistical evidence that was at the time not very complete. There are some activists, I suppose, who are trying to address that problem now, and the statistical evidence by sex and gender for violent crime is much more useful than it was when I was writing the book. I had to try to pick it apart. Again, that took a long time to understand all the different tables and put together the pages which are more like infographics. So yeah, it took a really long time, but I'm glad I did it, and I think I learnt a lot, and I'm now in the middle of writing another novel-length work, so I'm hoping it'll be a little bit quicker this time.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Una.
Thank you.